So without further ado, I'm now going to shoot over to the sunshine in the Middle East, and delighted to welcome Robert Bruce, SBN member over there. Robert, do you want to just take a wee minute to tell us about Robert Bruce and how the boy from graduate at Robert Gordon's has ended up with such a global profile there?
Thank you very much, Christine. I think Dubai must have known that you were calling today, because it's pretty bleak here as well, as a matter of fact, which is quite unseasonable. But yeah, I've been in the Middle East now. I think this is my 12th year. I've lived in a variety of countries. 6 years in the Emirates, a couple of years in Bahrain, a couple of years in Saudi Arabia, and then back to the Emirates a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's served us very, very well. We came out here during the previous financial crisis in 2008, which served us well, and we've never really looked back. It's a very interesting and very dynamic market to be part of.
So you're out there with your family, Robert, yeah. And you've got about 17 years. I was looking at your profiles. I want to do stalking people on LinkedIn. So you've got 17 years experience in the oil and gas industry, Robert. If we can maybe just start with, I think it was 2 weeks ago we heard what was happening out in the Middle East, but it'd be good to get an update now. What the situation is looking like regarding lockdown and how the government is responding this week to the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, Dubai, to their credit, reacted very, very well, as you would expect in this sort of political regime. They were very quick to lock everything down, very quick to, close the schools down, and provide the sort of strong arm advice or instruction on what to do. It's only with Ramadan kicking off over last weekend that things have started to ease ever so slightly. Children are still locked into the house with my four. They're all climbing the walls, and which I'm sure most of the people on the call can relate to. But we were seeing one or two things, a couple of bank branches opening up, and a couple of small chains starting to open up, and I think there's a recognition, particularly in the Emirates, that the lifeblood of the SMEs need to get back to work and need to start trading soon. That seems to be very, very clear.
And that being a lifeblood and SMEs, how has the government responded to that? I mean, yesterday here in the UK alone, we had a new fund support, bounce back support outlined, details opening up on the 4th of May. How has the government in Dubai responded to this, particularly with the number of inward investors that you have there?
Yeah. No, I was very impressed to see that fund released in the UK. It looked very positive, and it looked bang on the money for what the SMEs needed. I've not really seen the same sort of measure being implemented in the UAE. I mean, if you go onto the Central Bank of the UAE's website, there's a clear list of the sort of liquidity measures and relief packages that they've put in place for varieties of companies, both large corporates and private resident trading bodies and whatnot. But what the overwhelming theme is, there's about 100 billion dirhams of liquidity being re-injected into the market, as well as I think there's nearly 100 different fee structures which are either being waived or heavily discounted to try and make sure that both imports and exports are moving and not log jammed, if you will, at the ports, because I think that's probably one of the primary concerns. But my feeling is that you're still going to pay. The Emirates is still going to make you pay, but they're going to kick that down the road a little bit. But they're just going to make sure that you've got the liquidity to get through this hard cycle, if you will, over the next sort of 6 months. But I'm sure they'll collect their money further on down the line.
I'm sure, as most governments will, Robert.
Sure.
Robert, in our earlier conversations and why we've had this follow-up chat, you gave some very interesting, and it was your personal thoughts around the market and your particular expertise, as I said earlier, is in the oil and gas industry, which has been a customer, or rather a main buyer for a number of our callers here today. So I'd be very interesting if you could share a bit more about Petrofac, what things were like for you in the market up until earlier this year, and your perception of how that supply chain into the oil and gas industry may change, Robert. And as I say, it's very much your thoughts. It's not a Petrofac view here.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I think we need to take a step back and look at the oil and gas industry as a whole. I mean, it's had a horrendous time over the last sort of 10, 12 years, to be perfectly honest, with sort of 3 major boom and bust cycles in such a close proximity of time. I don't really think the industry has ever really recovered since the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. You know, the lack of capital investment and the lack of confidence in the oil and gas industry has always held it back really from really pushing forward. If you look at our peer competitors, they've all lost somewhere in the region of 50 to 60% of their share price in the last 6 months. You know, so investors are not seeing the oil and gas industry as a bankable bet as it used to be. I think with what we're going through just now, there's a real concern over supply chain. There's a lot of knee-jerk reactions happening in the marketplace with companies of all shapes and sizes restructuring. The immediate, as I say, knee-jerk reaction is to rip out as much cost as you can to try and weather the storm. But that's very much a short-term move. And the winners that are going to be in the next sort of 12 to 18 months are the ones that get the right sizing and the right restructuring strategies correct for how the market returns. And that's a bit of a crystal ball exercise, to be honest.
Yeah. You mentioned a comment to me about you'd seen a sort of slash and burn approach from companies, particularly in relevance to staff in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And given we're going to see, we believe, control around movement, not just of trade, but of individuals, how will that look as lockdown is eased in the Middle East, as individuals have been moved out of the country? Will that mean it will be longer to see movement in the supply chain, Robert?
It's difficult. I mean, on one side with the UAE, what they've done quite well is actually extend visas carte blanche during this period. So I think there's a natural sort of extension by 3 or 6 months anyway. But I think the lack of confidence in this market and the large scale repatriation that's going to go on really is going to cut deep into the capabilities and capacities of supply chain across all markets, to be perfectly honest. Because I mean, you look at the Middle East as a whole, and it's built on really 3 primary pillars, which is, you know, tourism, oil and gas, and sort of finance real estate, if you will. And all of those have been hit exceptionally hard during this pandemic. I mean, we're seeing rental prices going through the floors. We're seeing schools being decimated with parents pulling their children out as well. So, you know, the whole ecosystem is really taking a major hit. And I think, you know, if you compare and contrast to some of the strategies of the stimuluses in Europe, it's just not there. It's just not there to protect it. So I think we'll see maybe in 12 months' time, 12 to 18 months' time, when we come through the full cycle, how the dust settles across not only here but maybe in Saudi Arabia as well. How the national governments and the national oil cos are going to react is going to be really interesting.
One of the key things that you said there is about, the tourism industry, and we've a number of members for whom tourism is absolutely key. Again, your personal thoughts around how the tourism industry in the Middle East, which is such, as you say, a pillar, how do you feel that will respond? Are we looking at 2021 before we see any movement there, Robert?
Well, it's really, I mean, what we can't really underestimate is human behaviours. And I come back to the word of confidence. I mean, most of the people I speak to don't even want to see the sight of a plane in 2020. And this part of the world is exceptionally dependent on air travel coming into the region. What we saw just before the lockdown really was a consolidation of hotels. So full buildings were being mothballed, to be perfectly honest, and guests who were in some hotels were being consolidated into partner hotels and such like. But it will come back. It definitely will come back. But again, it's a matter of time, and it's a matter of confidence coming back into the market. I don't think it will be as buoyant as previously. I mean, we'll still feel the ramifications of this for a long time to come.
Yeah. Just checking, I was checking in the chat there, if anyone has any particular questions that they want to ask Robert, please feel free, as always, use the chat function, and I'll bring those into questions. As you know, I've always got loads of questions to ask, but I don't want to be hogging these insight sessions. Given that we've got a restriction on travel, we're seeing this Zoom platform and so many other platforms being used across business. Do you feel that there is still that opportunity for companies to use this shift in technology to build opportunities within the new world, within the Middle East? How do you think that will work for trade, Robert?
Yeah, I think it will, as a matter of fact. Two primary points. I think there's going to be a greater drive for not only digital innovation but collaboration with the SME firms and unique firms that have a USP. And the only way of accessing them more economically is going to be through forums like this and these sort of digital platforms. I mean, again, if you tie that into what we're anticipating with the supply chain weakening, it's really going to be essential for SMEs to strengthen their access to these sort of networks in order to try and build relationships, to access the market at such a, well, ultimately limited cost. So the days of flying someone over to a particular region for a couple of weeks at a time with excessive costs isn't abundantly necessary anymore. And I think you're really going to have to put a firm business case forward for that to happen.
Yeah. Where do you see the opportunities then? We're hearing it, it's tourism, it's oil and gas, it's finance, it's online more than the physical presence. You've seen consolidation in the supply chain. Where, if you were, well, as you are, sharing your insights back with Scottish businesses, where would you be saying to people to be looking at the moment, to be exploring, to be gathering intelligence on at this time in order to be able to move forward in your market?
I think putting my oil and gas hat back on, you're not going to see any major spend from the international oil companies over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. It's going to be very, very limited. I think those companies that are involved with the operations and maintenance and enhancement of existing facilities, may have a business case, may have any sort of technology or different methodology of working that increases value is going to get limelight. And that's where I see the next sort of 12 months. It's going to be painful, but there's going to be a demand to create value for the national oil cos here. They're the only ones that are really going to spend throughout the next sort of 12 to 18 months. If just looking back in history over the last sort of couple of cycles, what we see is that the national oil cos typically come to market and try to capitalize on soft markets. So when contractors are in a position of weakness, we see a lot of tendering activity or a lot of engagement to try and assess the market and try and do things more economically and more smarter than when we do maybe at an $80 oil price, etc. So collaboration, creating value, and pricing aggressively ultimately.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Last couple of questions from me. As a senior, you're Director of Business Development for Saudi Arabia and Bahrain there, Robert. What have you learned from a leadership perspective during this crisis that you will apply going forward?
Yeah, I think I'd like to come back to the human behaviour side of things, to be honest. I think, I was part of a lecture at Cranfield earlier on this month, and I think the part that they highlighted was the necessary demand for people to commute to a highly populated office it's just been blown out the water. That's no longer necessary anymore. So I think this part of the world will be much more accommodating in trying to factor these sort of soft human resource issues back into the workplace. The main problem I have is accessing the customer. Is how willingly will the customer be willing to engage in these sort of digital forums and these sort of digital interactions, and whether or not you really do build the relationship that you're looking for on the back of this. So it's an evolving picture, but it's cost is king, and these tools are here to stay. They're not going away anywhere anytime soon.
Given the importance of culture within, particularly in the Middle East, and I know we've got Jackie on, who's got great experience of working in the Far East, as does Graham McWilliam from supplying there. Mm-hmm. How important will culture be with these online systems, Robert?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, if you look over the last sort of 5 years, particularly in the UAE and definitely Saudi Arabia, there's been a breathtaking drive for localization. So to localize your full sort of competence in the country that you're operating, and the way things are structured, it does give you a competitive advantage. So these markets there's going to be a conflict between the cost that you incur and your ability to localize and engage with the customer. And those rather than coming closer, those are going to get further apart. So it's that's going to be a major problem for a lot of SMEs to try and address. And the only way I can think about negating that is probably through collaboration with larger firms.
Okay. So culture will still be important there.
Yeah, essential. Yeah, absolutely essential. I mean, you need to be able to address the local market and the culture.
Yeah. So maybe then it's about looking at more around agents, etc., in a market who can provide that on the ground support for you and collaborate with them. Yeah.
I would always recommend everyone to avoid agents like the plague, to be perfectly honest. If there's someone you want to work with, then an open joint venture is the only way to go forward.
Good. Good, great insight, Robert. Thank you. So my final question to you, Robert, is we've got a captive audience here of fellow Scots who are used to operating in global markets. What would your advice be to them here as we come to the end of now into our second month of lockdown in quite a changing world?
You know, that's a really good question. I was reflecting on this the other day, and I just think you should never ever waste a crisis. I think that, you know, even though how negative everything is coming out into the internet and the news and whatnot, and what terrible situation we've got happening, you know, on a health perspective, but throughout a crisis, there's always an opportunity to capitalize, and I think, you know, if you look at the SME measures that the Abu Dhabi government is putting in place, you know, the trade relaxations that the UAE is putting in place, if you did have a plan of coming to the UAE or coming to the Middle East, you know, you should really address that and look at what the economic advantages are of doing that now.
Lovely. We're so fortunate in these insights. We always get great sound bites there, and that never waste a crisis, as Joy has pointed out. That's a great sound bite there, Robert. Thank you for that. Last week we had a highly entertaining one with one of our members misspelt the word leadership, and I'll just leave you to think about that one. But we're getting all these great sound bites. Robert, an absolute joy to connect with you, albeit virtually. We've got no further questions coming in from our members, but as always, I know that the offer is there for any further insights or follow-ups. You're very open to continue these conversations, Robert. So
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Happy to help whenever I can.
Great stuff. Well, I'm delighted with none of the Bruce family charging in there. You'd obviously had them well disciplined today. So thank you for that, Robert. And as always, stay safe, and look forward to hopefully at some time in the not too distant future meeting up with you.
Thank you ever so much, and wishing you all the best in the endeavours, and stay safe. Thanks again.
Lovely. Take care, Robert. See you soon.